a lot of times when people hear about the inverted pyramid, their reaction is, oh, servant leadership, humble CEOs at the bottom. That's maybe an element to it, but not, in my mind, the most important. To me, the most important thing is that it is the accurate way of thinking about how organizations work. Any organization larger than 25 people, I always tell the leader of that organization, just be aware that the rest of the organization doesn't really want to hear from you.
Hello, and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling, FranklinCovey's head of product. Today's conversation is with Frank Blank, the previous chairman and CEO of the Home Depot, where he led an incredibly successful run from 2007 to 2014. Prior to leading the Home Depot, Frank Blake had senior roles in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations, as well as working at GE under Jack Welch. After leaving the Home Depot, Frank has served on the board of many of America's most iconic companies like Procter & Gamble, Hertz, Delta, and others. Frank is a student of leadership. Having worked with, for, and led many iconic leaders, he has really internalized the lessons learned along the way. Today's conversation touches on his leadership approach and philosophy with important stories across his business experiences. Frank Blake, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
It's great to be on with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're very excited for today's conversation. So I want to start by transporting us in time back to January 3rd, 2007. You just have taken over as the CEO of Home Depot. I want you to walk us through the first 100 days. What were the biggest decisions that you faced? And walk me through how, as the new CEO, you made those decisions.
Great. Well, first, just as background to January 3rd, your listeners should know that I was shocked to be the CEO of the Home Depot. I didn't expect it. It wasn't something I was planning for. Even in the middle of the night, driving along with the windshield wipers going, I wasn't thinking, what would I do if I were CEO of this company? And there was no one else at Home Depot thinking that I'd be the CEO. So it was very much a surprise. And I had a lot, so that meant I had a lot of things to do come January 3rd. The first, I would tell you, is my career. I'm a lawyer by training. While I had moved away from the law, what I largely did was M&A. So I was in charge of small professional teams buying and selling companies, mostly buying. Now I would be in charge of, give or take at the time, 350,000 employees. That was a brand new leadership challenge for me, leading that large and diverse a group. One of the first things I did was at Home Depot, like a lot of retailers, we have a means of communicating to the store in the break room, where we have a TV that goes into the break room with Home Depot content. The associates would try to turn it off. We'd try to prevent them from turning it off. Anyway, I had it was the expectation that I would talk to our associates first thing. And so I called my son, at the time was a store manager at Home Depot, come back from Iraq. The company has a program where returning veterans can work in a store. He'd worked in a number of stores, and at that time he was a store manager in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I said, first off, I'm going to be the CEO. And he laughed, and I said, no, seriously, I'm going to be CEO. And I said, no, this is really serious. I'm going to be the CEO. And he said, well, good luck with that, Dad. And I said, I am curious what you think the associates would want to hear. And he said, well, I don't know, but I can tell you how I start my weekly store meetings. And I start my weekly store meetings by reading from Built from Scratch, which is the book written by the two co-founders of Home Depot, Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank, about building Home Depot after they'd been fired from their prior job. It's a great book. I would urge everyone to read that book. It's a great book of entrepreneurial drive and spirit in the U.S. And I said, that's a great idea. I will do the same. So I madly flipped through the book. I came to something that I thought was an appropriate topic, which was both Bernie and Arthur talked about leadership as leading with an inverted pyramid, where the CEO is at the bottom of the pyramid and the frontline associates and the customers are at the top. For the next 8 years as CEO, I took that very seriously. It was the first thing I talked to our associates about. So I guess I'd put that in the bucket of the first thing to do was just change the tone and direction of the company. Second, within the first 100 days, I went before the board and said that, mind you, I had been doing M&A at Home Depot, and we built up a very, very large commercial distribution company all through acquisitions. I had been in charge of every one of those acquisitions, and I said, I want to sell that business. And well, that's exactly right. So that was an interesting board meeting, and we got through that, and they supported that, and we got underway in the first 100 days to sell the business. I have this is a much more structured thought process in my mind around how you create shareholder value in a company. And I had 100-day, sort of a 90-day plan, a 180-day plan, and then a longer-term plan, and just set about to doing the things I thought needed to be done in the first 90 to 180 days.
I've heard you describe the inverted pyramid before, and I would love for you to share it. I think it's a really powerful concept and powerful visual. I'd love you to share what is the inverted period for our
Yeah,
listeners.
so I am passionate about this topic. I think a lot of times when people hear about the inverted pyramid, their reaction is, oh, servant leadership, humble CEOs at the bottom. That's maybe an element to it, but not, in my mind, the most important. To me, the most important thing is that it is the accurate way of thinking about how organizations work. Any organization larger than 25 people, I always tell the leader of that organization, just be aware that the rest of the organization doesn't really want to hear from you. They just assume you leave them alone. And so when I hear about leaders talking about messages that cascade down through an organization, right off you go, that's wrong. That's not right. You actually have to exert enormous energy to get your message up through an organization, remembering that gravity is no longer your friend when you flip over the pyramid. And it gets you focusing on things like communication. How do you communicate? How do you listen? Because everything that's important is happening above you, and there isn't a natural way to hear that. It also, I think, is a good reflection of how you think about your team when you start, when you're at the bottom of the pyramid rather than the top. Because I'm sorry to be going through this quickly, but I could spend a lot of time on this topic. But one of the most important things to me is that when you flip the pyramid, all the pressure is, it's humble at one level, but at another level, you're putting the whole organization on top of you. You're responsible for that organization. Once you understand that and internalize that, you want a team around you that can bear that weight, that shares the responsibility, and you absolutely have to be aligned on where you're going, or it's going to fracture. So there are lots of other learnings from it. I can kind of go through some of the details in terms of communication and listening and all the rest of that. But I believe that it's the right way to think about organizational structure.
You mentioned earlier having a son who was a store
Yeah.
manager in your organization. That is a unique perspective for a CEO. How do you think having your son embedded at that level in the organization changed the way you led?
It had an enormous impact. First, as a leader of an organization, you're always looking for someone who's going to tell you what's really going on. And most people in any organization know that they're best off not telling their bosses what's really going on. With my son, the most common phrase that I got from him was, "Well, Dad, I'm sure that briefed well in Atlanta." Atlanta, where, yeah, or what we call the store support center. And that was so true. right? You think, this is great, I'm doing this, this project's going to be a big help. And then you realize, no, actually, you have to get very ground engaged to understand what is actually happening. And you have to be constantly probing for the truth in terms of the impact of what you're doing. And so having my son as a store manager was a great vehicle for me to figure out what was actually going on frequently.
For people who don't have somebody who's willing to shoot them straight like that inside of the organization by blood, what's your recommendation for getting really deep insights from across, deep, accurate insights from across the organization?
First, I'm a big believer in skip level meetings of all sorts. If you've got a distributed business like a Home Depot is with lots of stores all over the place, get in the field, get your feet on the ground, walk around. Second, there are some what I would call hacks in terms of how you ask questions. My phrase to folks is, once you understand, here's the way it materializes in a Home Depot. If I ask a store manager, how's everything going? There's only one right answer to that in an organization, and the answer is, everything's going great, you're amazing, please leave. That's the right answer. So if you're going to try to get past that answer, you got to ask a different question than how's everything going. I got in the habit of always asking questions on a scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how is blank doing? And the benefit of that is, look, no one's going to say a 1 or a 2. No one's going to say a 9 or a 10. Every answer provides an opportunity to say, how can it be better? What can we do to make it better? Similarly, I actually learned from one of our board members. I learned to ask a question that presupposes that things aren't going well. So I would ask, this isn't going well, is it? Why do you think that? And you'd get, every once in a while somebody would say, why do you say that? It's going brilliantly. But more often than not, they go, oh my gosh, he knows it's not going well. I guess I better tell him why I think it's not going well. And it's just a constant effort to have real conversations about what's actually happening. And then honoring the people who go out of their way to tell you what's broken, because that that really is, you have to rely on the voice of your customer. I tried to read all my customer emails. You have to rely on what the store associates are saying. It's not that it's always 100% true, but you've got to understand what the feedback is and how you're paying attention to it.
I love those questions. Yeah, one of my favorite one-on-one questions is, how satisfied, fulfilled are you in this job
Right,
on a scale of 1 to
right,
10? And then what would it look like to
right,
go up by
right.
1? If they say 7, what would an 8
Yeah,
look like? And
exactly,
you can always get
exactly
something.
well. That's
So
exactly right.
that's great. I've heard that one of your keys to success in your tenure at Home Depot, and it was a very successful tenure from a financial perspective. One of the keys to success was building this orange apron cult, right? You really obsessed over the customer experience, and you hired store managers and associates who understood the industry. I think about my own experience going into a Home Depot, and you're going to talk to somebody trusted inside of that store. So talking about, how did you settle on the importance of being customer obsessed, and then what practically did you do to bring that to life? It's more than posters on walls, it's more than emails to associates. How did you really shift the culture to be customer obsessed?
So the first thing I'd say about that is to acknowledge that had been the culture that was set up by the founders, and it had been disrupted for a bit, but it wasn't like this was starting just without anybody knowing what customer service looks like and what the basic principles are. It's what Bernie and Arthur and Ken Langone, the other co-founder, talked about all the time. And I mean all the time. So a lot of it was, hey, you remember that muscle memory. That's what we're going back to. First thing. Second thing is, I'm a big believer in how you set culture through recognition and celebration. And that's the most important thing that you do as a leader. And in my opinion, it's maybe the least well understood and the least exercised leadership muscle. So for us, to give an example, I had a notion of what customer service, how we needed to focus on customer service. For the 8 years that I was running Home Depot, one of the things I did was every Sunday, half a day, every Sunday, I would write handwritten notes to hourly associates saying, in effect, "Dear Joe or Jane, I heard that you did X," whatever X was. It was a specific thing. You're wonderful, you're great, Frank. And we had a process where every store would give its example of great customer service to the district would give it to the region would send it in to me, and I'd write 200 handwritten notes. After a while, people, that had an impact. I think we abstract things too much, and there are too many sort of general, people want to put metrics around stuff, and that can be helpful. But really, if I want people to understand what it is that I'm looking for, the best way for me to express that is with a story. And the best stories are the ones that recognize and celebrate the people who are doing the work. So we had very much a culture of recognition and celebration. We did little films on our associates. We did books on our associates. I sent them notes. We took them on trips. We did just everything was designed around explaining what great behavior looks like for people to see, because that's self-reinforcing, because people see, oh, that's what they want. I got it. I do that. And it replicates itself. So that's a shorthanded view. I do believe, I tell company leaders this all the time. The most common business phrase that everybody knows is you get what you measure. I think there's an important corollary. You get what you celebrate and recognize. Tell me what you celebrate and recognize, and that's what you're going to get. And interestingly, a lot of leaders don't even have an intentional plan on what they're going to recognize and celebrate.
Absolutely. I think that's such a profound and important line. And I think it is so true when you reward behavior, whether it's rewarding in public, rewarding in private, you're going to generate more of that great
Yep.
behavior. You are clearly a student of leadership, both in developing yourself and developing an amazing company and team. And you have had the great fortune of working with many amazing leaders. So I want to ask you about a couple of people you've worked with and maybe one key lesson that you've learned
Yeah.
from them. So putting anybody's political leanings aside, Ronald Reagan was, I think, somebody you worked with or you had
Yeah.
exposure to very
It,
early in your career. What did you learn from Ronald
So
Reagan?
Ronald Reagan, I did have the privilege of working with President Reagan. I think he's one of the great leaders of our time. And there were a couple of important things to me from President Reagan. The first was the value of clear and direct communication. Now, I say I'm a lawyer. We're trained to speak in many words. We're trained to speak in shades of gray. What President Reagan did was, at the time I worked for him, I didn't have a big job. I had a reasonable sized job in the administration, but I actually knew what the president wanted me to do. His communication through the vast bureaucracy of the federal government was clear enough and directionally clear enough that I understood what he wanted. And when I was at Home Depot, I told my team my objective here is that I could go onto the floor of any store in the company, ask an associate, what does Frank want me to do, and get an answer that's roughly the same, store to store to store. That, in my opinion, was one of the geniuses of Reagan.
Another leader that you worked for was Jack Welch. What did you learn from Jack Welch? What was his
I
superpower?
learned so many things from Jack. That would be its own podcast. In fact, for the 8 years I was CEO, I'd spent a day every year with Jack just getting CEO 101 training. The first thing, and two really big things from Jack. The first was getting people to disagree with you. So as the CEO, it's hard to get people, you're talking about some issue, it's hard to get them to disagree with you. The genius of Welch at GE was I started as a lawyer at GE. Lawyers, it's an engineering and finance company, lawyers are kind of, yeah, not exactly top of the totem pole. But I internalized that if I'm going to succeed at GE, there's going to come a point where I'm going to disagree with the chairman and I got to say it. And I got to be right and I got to be willing to stand for whatever I'm saying. But if I am right, that will be worthwhile. And that is actually exactly what played out in my career. Most companies, no matter how open CEOs say they are to debate and to people pushing back on them, most people and most leaders aren't perceived that way. Jack at some level, he wanted to know how much you cared about whatever point you were making, and he wanted to know that by challenging you and challenging you hard. It was uncomfortable, but it's brilliant when you can pull it off. I'm not sure, I know I didn't succeed as well as Jack did, but that was certainly an objective of mine. And then the other more general thing is energy and curiosity. The guy had unbelievable energy and limitless curiosity. If you spent an hour with Jack, you'd walk away feeling like, a vacuum cleaner just cleaned out your brain. He wanted to know everything you know. And so if you think about how much time does he spend speaking versus how much time he spends listening, every interaction I had with him, he spent a hell of a lot more time listening than speaking. He wanted to know and I think that's for I've been blessed to work with an amazing set of leaders. I'd say the most common characteristic of the great leaders is just unbelievable, limitless curiosity.
Great leaders don't just manage change, they energize it. FranklinCovey's The Energy of Change reveals 5 behaviors that help teams move forward through uncertainty. Get your free copy in the show notes and learn how to lead with integrity and inspire your people to thrive. So continuing on the theme of Frank Blank, student of leadership, I know you went to law school and not to business school, but let's say Columbia calls you and says, hey, we want you to come and be the dean of our business school. You've had such an illustrious career in business. And the first course that you're in charge of designing is how to develop first-level managers. What are the things that you would teach a first-level manager? A lot of 28-year-old business school grads, never managed before. They're going out into the world and they're going to be a manager for the first time. What would you teach somebody who's a manager for the first time?
All right, so this is a pretty simple lesson, but it's an important one. Whatever level you're in, and whomever you're reporting to, and whatever you're doing, take a minute and write down on a piece of paper, on the right-hand side of the piece of paper, what do I want my bosses thinking about me? What do I want them to think of me? And then on the left-hand side of the piece of paper, what do I need to do to achieve that? And I can give you the example I used as, I did that exercise for the board and me when I was CEO. I wanted them to think I was transparent, delivered results, strategic, built great teams. Those were my 4 things. I'd have had different ones, different points in my career. But I think one of the things that human beings are most interesting about is we can think that, we're heading north on Route 95, see all the signs that we're going south and we're heading to Florida, and think as long as we want to go north, we're going to get there. And the connection between what you want as an outcome versus what you're doing to get there, and how intentional you are about that is absent. So I think people assume that their intentions are what matter, and I would say they don't matter. It's what you do to match your intention with what your actions are.
That makes sense. Continuing on in Dean of Columbia Business School, now you're teaching a course on how to become a director. The first lesson they've internalized, it's great, and now they're a director, not just a manager, so they're managing a team of managers. What kind of new skills or focus areas would you teach them?
I'm sorry, a director like at a general manager level in a company.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Not a board
So
director.
now I'm a general manager. So now as a general
Correct.
manager, what I would teach them is you got to now step into, I got three vectors of leadership that I got to be focused on. I've got my team that I'm leading, and same exercise. Where am I driving my team? What are my objectives of my team? The change and the difference, I got my boss and I got the same exercise with my boss, but now I'm also trying to lead indirectly through my colleagues. And am I understanding where they're coming from, what's motivating them, how I behaviorally align or don't align with their objectives is a critical part of the general manager role. And actually you need to understand how the business works. So I guess I'd add that's that's the leadership element to it. The business element to it is when you're in the general manager role, understand how your business works. Understand what drives its economic engine, understand your role in it, and understand everybody else's role in it.
You mentioned a little bit ago that one of the ways that you want to be perceived as a CEO was being strategic.
Yeah.
Strategic that you build great teams, et cetera. Um, as people are emerging into leadership roles, strategy is a new capability they bring on. How do you suggest somebody improves their strategic leadership skills?
A lot of times, I believe that that comes from taking a look at what you do. So there's some really interesting commentary on this that Jeff Bezos has in his letters. He wrote some great letters while he was running Amazon. And it's about thinking about inputs and outputs and the strategic value of inputs. So a lot of times you get overly focused on the output and not focused enough on the input. So you ought to, as a strategic matter, be able to say to whoever is your boss or whoever is listening, I want to get to this output. Here are the 5 things that I'm doing that I think are going to get me there. And if you get everybody's heads nodding on the 5 things, that these are the 5 logical things that are going to drive this output, odds are, first off, you're going to have clear thought process to get you to the output. Secondly, you'll buy some forgiveness if you miss the output because you don't, life throws you curveballs. But a lot of times people short circuit both their own thinking and their explanations by just going directly to the output. I'm going to improve margin rate by 20%, okay, or 20 points, whatever it is. How are you going to do it? What are the 5 things that matter?
In this final phase of your career, this next phase of your career after being CEO of Home Depot, you've become a wonderful board member of a lot of kind of iconic American companies, Hertz, Procter and Gamble, Delta, et cetera. How did being the CEO of a publicly traded company change the way that you show up as a board member for these other companies?
Well, governance for U.S. boards is, I think it's really important to understand what you do as a board member and what you don't do. And as a board member, you don't run the company. It is about governance. Are we talking about the things we should talk about? Are we asking management the questions that show that they've done the thinking? But our job is not to run the company. Our job isn't to be an expert in whatever it is, at the moment that's around the table. By and large, this is true. I tell CEOs that they need to get 2 things right to be successful. They need to allocate capital right, and they need to allocate human beings correctly. Do I have the right people working on the right things? Have I put the right money to the right issues? And the board is really there to make sure that the CEO has the right thought process around those 2 key issues.
Can you maybe share an example of a board that you've been on where the board has been really helpful to the CEO and company? A story of really meaningful board impact?
Well, I would say, and I would put this less on the board than the CEO, but since I was the chair of the board at the time. I'll use this as an opportunity to brag on the CEO. What Ed Bastian did during COVID at Delta should be studied in management books for a long, long time. I mean, imagine this is literally true. We were sitting around the board table in February 2020 thinking this is going to be the best year in the history of Delta. Best year in the history. 3 weeks later, 95% of the revenues have disappeared. And this is an asset and people intensive business. I mean, a shock to the system like none that has ever happened in the airline industry. And the airline industry has seen some tough shocks. Ed walked into the board room and had one piece of paper with 7 or 8 bullets on it that was here are our priorities during this crisis. It started with taking care of employees, taking care of customers, and went down from there. We had he made an incredible effort at communicating with employees and communicating with customers and communicating with the board. And we had lots of things to do. We had to raise a lot of cash. We had all kinds of international ventures that needed to, that had to go through bankruptcy and the rest. A lot going on, and he kept it very effectively organized and very effective communication around it. I wouldn't take credit for that. Ed should take credit for it. I saw it and said, this is actually what it looks like to lead through a crisis.
Having seen Ed Bastian navigate COVID as CEO of Delta, what would you have done differently as CEO of Home Depot navigating the housing crisis in 2008, 2009?
That's an interesting question. It didn't unfold as dramatically, but we actually, the only thing I will say is more than most, we saw that this was going bad, that we saw that the housing market was starting to collapse in the summer of 2006. I think for me, probably if I had the benefit of hindsight, I'd have done the same things, but would have done them faster.
Say more.
Well, so we stopped in 2008. We stopped building new stores. Okay, well, we were still building stores in 2007, and that was a huge use of capital, and we could stop and we stopped not just as a short-term thing. We stopped for years. I think I know we stopped for the 8 years I was CEO, and really for the last. They've just picked up in the last few years, but for 15 years, effectively, we stopped building new stores in the U.S. That was a hugely important strategic thing to do. It was the right thing to do in the face of the housing market crisis, but also just generally the right thing to do because there was so much growth possible through improving the individual store. But as an example, that took until 2008.
You've had a fascinating window on the American story as working in government for multiple administrations, working in business at these iconic American companies. This is a big question to ask, but do you think America's best days are ahead or behind, and why?
I'm always optimistic about America, and I will say one of the things that fuels that optimism is the time I spent at Home Depot. So it's the great thing about Home Depot as an exemplar of the kind of what the United States has to offer, or we're now in Canada and Mexico as well. What North America has to offer is no one starts in a retail job saying, I'm going to make my career in retail. But you sort to find people that actually really engage, like doing it, really enjoy the business. By and large, most of the people who start working in retail do not have a college degree for whatever reason. And through their hard work and sweat equity, they will become the most successful people in their family. I do still time to time have lunches and dinners with Home Depot associates, and I love the stories just going around the table of the people whose lives were altered by their hard work and effort. And as long as that's the case in the country, as long as we have people who can change, who have that control over their lives to put their hard work and improve themselves and their family, as long as that's seen, as long as that's part of our country, we're going to do great.
Wonderful. I agree and appreciate the optimism on America's future and dynamism. So I want to move to a lightning round before we close. A couple of quick questions for you. The first is, what is the home improvement project that you have enjoyed most in the last 5 years or so?
So I enjoy fixing toilets because every once in a while I can do it.
Okay, there you go. What as the on the board of Delta, I'm sure you travel a lot, took a lot of Delta flights. What's your best vacation destination?
Norway.
Norway. I wasn't expecting that. Say more. Why?
I love Norway. It's a great country. Beautiful, beautiful place. Lovely people. We actually went last December. Usually it's nicer in the summer, obviously.
Yeah. You went for the Northern Lights.
But we went in December and just had an absolutely brilliant time. It's a great place.
You went for the Northern Lights,
No.
or you went just to be there in the winter?
We went to I took my most of my family, 20 of us, went to a very remote hotel at the end of a fjord where there's not even a town around, and I was worried that we wouldn't have, everybody would be bored, and everybody loved it. It was absolutely.
Oh, that's great. What is the leadership book that you find yourself recommending most often
Good
to
to great.
people?
Far,
Good to great.
Not a doubt.
If you were to write a leadership book, what would the title be?
I don't know. I'm going to pass on that one. I have no idea. Good to Great is such a good book, and there are a few other great business books. I swear off writing another business book.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, maybe Building Greatness
There
or
you go.
something. It'll be a turn on Good to Great. All right, wonderful. So the same question that we asked all of our guests to close. FranklinCovey is obviously a leadership company. So I'd love to hear, who is a leader? We talked about some already, but who is a leader that has greatly influenced your life, and what is the major lesson you learned from them that all of us should incorporate in ours?
So I'm the Home Depot founders are an amazing group. I'm going to focus on Ken Langone because Ken was my lead director at the start, and Ken embodies to me a lot of the core leadership characteristics we've already been going through. High energy, enormous curiosity, brain works incredibly fast, can process information quickly, and he is someone who on the floor of a store or in a boardroom shows up as genuine, and that is a really important characteristic. I've learned so much from Ken.
Wonderful. Well, Frank, thank you so much. I've learned so much from you today. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure our guests have appreciated and learned a lot as well.
Thank you, Will.
Absolutely. To all of our guests, thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe. All of our listeners, thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts, and hope you'll join us next week for another episode of FranklinCovey on Leadership.